Welcome to Revenge with Peter Stories from my grandpa. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Peter and I share the incredible stories of justice and wisdom from my grandfather's life. Today's story is about the moment when quiet dignity became the most powerful force in our family. My name is William, and at 67 years old I thought I had seen every form of disrespect life could offer. I was wrong. The cruelest cut came not from a stranger, but from my own son, Thomas, and it happened in the house I built with my own hands 43 years ago. Let me start at the beginning, because every story worth telling needs context, and this one spans decades of careful planning, sacrifice, and ultimately, a lesson in respect that my son will never forget. I married my beloved wife, Margaret, in 1978. We were both 22, fresh out of college, and ready to take on the world together. I had a degree in civil engineering, she had one in education, and together we had dreams bigger than our bank account could handle. But we had something more valuable than money. We had determination and a plan. Our first home was a tiny rental apartment above Mrs. Henderson's bakery on Maple Street. The smell of fresh bread woke us every morning at 4:30 a.m., and we paid $180 a month for the privilege. Margaret would grade her elementary school papers at our kitchen table, which was really just a card table we bought second-hand, while I worked nights at the construction company to supplement my day job at the engineering firm. Those were lame times, but they were good times. We were building something together, and every sacrifice felt like an investment in our future. Margaret would pack my lunch in a brown paper bag, and I'd eat bologna sandwiches while sitting on construction sites, dreaming about the house we would someday build for ourselves. By 1980, we had saved enough for a down payment on a small lot in what was then the outskirts of town. Nobody wanted to live there. The roads weren't paved, there was no public water, and the nearest grocery store was 12 miles away. But I saw potential where others saw problems, and more importantly, I saw opportunity where others saw obstacles. William, Margaret said one evening as we stood on that empty lot, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, "Are you sure about this? It's so remote." I took her hand and pointed toward the horizon. 20 years from now, this won't be remote. The city's expanding this way. I've seen the development plans at the Planning Commission meetings. That road they're talking about building, it'll run right past here. Those commercial zones they're considering, they'll bring shopping and restaurants within walking distance. She trusted my vision, and that trust became the foundation of everything that followed. I built our house myself, working every weekend and evening for 2 years. Margaret would bring me sandwiches and lemonade, and sometimes she'd pick up a hammer and help with the simpler tasks. We couldn't afford contractors, but I didn't mind. Every nail I drove, every board I cut, every shingle I installed was an act of love for my wife, love for the family we planned to raise, love for the future we were creating together. The house started small, just 1,200 square feet, but I designed it to grow. Every beam I placed, every wire I ran, every pipe I installed was part of a larger plan. I drew the blueprints myself, submitted them to the county for approval, and managed every aspect of the construction. When inspectors came by, they were impressed by the quality of the work. "You sure you're not a professional contractor?" one of them asked. I just smiled and said I was a man building a home for his family. Thomas was born in 1982, right there in our bedroom, with Dr. Peterson attending and Margaret's mother boiling water in our kitchen like something out of an old movie. I remember holding my son for the first time in the house I had built with my own hands, thinking about all the memories we would create within these walls. Within 5 years, I had added another bedroom, expanded the kitchen, and built a workshop in the basement where I could take on weekend carpentry projects for extra income. Thomas grew up watching me work on that house, playing with toy hammers while I installed new flooring, helping me paint the fence by getting more paint on himself than on the wood. "Daddy, why do you work so much on the house?" he asked one Saturday when he was about 6 years old. "Because this is our home, son," I told him. "When you take care of something you love, it takes care of you back." He nodded solemnly like he understood and continued playing with his blocks on the floor of the room I was renovating. By 1990, everything I had predicted came true. The new highway connected our area directly to downtown. The shopping center opened just 3 miles away. Property values in our neighborhood tripled, then tripled again. Our little remote house was now in one of the most desirable areas in the county, but I wasn't done building our future. While working my day job and maintaining our home, I had been quietly purchasing additional properties. When the elderly Mr. Kozlov decided to sell his small apartment building, I bought it. I spent weekends renovating the units myself, learning plumbing and electrical work from library books and helpful hardware store employees. When the Johnson farm went up for sale, I purchased the 40 acres behind our house. When the old Morrison family decided to move to Florida and sell their rental properties, I made offers on 3 of them. Each property purchase was carefully calculated. I studied market trends, analyzed rental rates, and projected future development patterns. Margaret and I would drive around on Sunday afternoons, looking at properties, discussing their potential. She had a good eye for design and often spotted problems or opportunities that I missed. That house on Elm Street, she said during one of our reconnaissance drives, the bones are good, but it needs a complete kitchen renovation. If you could modernize it while keeping the original hardwood floors, it would rent for twice what they're asking. She was right, as usual. I bought the house, spent 3 months renovating it myself, and rented it to a young teacher for $400 more per month than the previous owner had been charging. Margaret and I lived modestly. We drove used cars, shopped at discount stores, and took our vacations camping at state parks. Thomas wore hand-me-downs from his older cousins until he started high school, and even then we shopped carefully. To anyone looking at our lifestyle, we appeared to be a middle-class family living paycheck to paycheck. The truth was quite different. Every dollar we saved went into investments. Every property I purchased was carefully chosen for its potential. By the time Thomas graduated high school in 2000, I owned 17 rental properties, 120 acres of undeveloped land, and had an investment portfolio worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. But we never talked about money in front of Thomas. Margaret and I had agreed early on that we didn't want him to grow up with a sense of entitlement or the assumption that wealth would be handed to him. We wanted him to understand the value of hard work and the satisfaction of earning his own way in the world. When Thomas is older, he'll appreciate what we've built, Margaret said one evening as we reviewed our financial statements. But for now, let him be a normal kid who doesn't know his parents are quietly becoming wealthy. Thomas went to college on an academic scholarship, which made Margaret and me proud beyond words. He studied business administration and economics subjects that should have given him an appreciation for what I had been building all those years. During his college years, he would come home for holidays and summers, and I would sometimes catch him looking around our house with new eyes. "Dad," he said during his junior year, "when are you going to stop working with your hands and get a real job?" I was installing new hardwood floors in our living room at the time, a project that would have cost us $8,000 if we had hired contractors. I looked up from the board I was measuring and saw something in his expression I had never seen before: embarrassment. He was embarrassed by his father who worked with his hands. "This is real work, son," I replied calmly. "And it's work that's built everything you see around you." He shrugged and went to his room. Margaret and I exchanged glances, but we didn't say anything. We both hoped it was just a phase, the kind of attitude adjustment that sometimes comes with higher education and exposure to different ideas. After college, Thomas took a job at a corporate consulting firm in the city. He rented an expensive apartment downtown, bought a BMW with a loan that consumed a quarter of his salary, and began what he called his professional life. He visited us less frequently, and when he did visit, he seemed increasingly critical of our lifestyle. "You know, Dad, you could afford a nicer car," he said one Thanksgiving, looking out at my 10-year-old pickup truck in the driveway. "It's embarrassing when I tell my colleagues where I come from and they see that truck." Margaret's face tightened, but she stayed silent. I continued carving the turkey I had raised, and processed myself from our small flock in the backyard. "That truck has served me well," I said. "It's reliable, it's paid for, and it does everything I need it to do." "But what does it say about you professionally?" Thomas pressed. "Image matters in business, Dad. People judge you by what you drive, where you live, how you present yourself." I set down the carving knife and looked at my son directly. "Thomas, I care more about substance than image. This truck has helped me build a life that provides for our family. The fact that it's not shiny and new doesn't change its value." He rolled his eyes, and I saw Margaret's jaw tighten further. That was the first time I realized that my son had begun to see me not as a provider and protector, but as someone who was holding him back socially. The distance between us grew over the following years. Thomas would call occasionally, but our conversations became increasingly superficial. He would tell me about his work projects, his social activities, his plans to buy a bigger house or take expensive vacations. I would tell him about the properties I was renovating, the new tenants I had found, the improvements I was making to our home. We were speaking different languages, living in different worlds. In 2008, Thomas married a woman named Vanessa whom he had met at his consulting firm. She came from what she called old money. Her grandfather had been a banker, her father was a lawyer, and she had grown up in a world where appearances were everything and manual labor was something other people did. The engagement dinner was held at an upscale restaurant downtown. Margaret and I dressed in our best clothes and tried to make a good impression. Vanessa's parents, Charles and Patricia Whitmore, were polite but distant. They asked about my work, and when I mentioned that I was in construction and property management, I saw the familiar look of polite dismissal in their eyes. "How interesting," Patricia said in a tone that suggested it was anything but interesting. "And Margaret, what do you do?" "I teach elementary school," Margaret replied. "Oh, how noble," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The wedding was held at the country club where Vanessa's family held a membership. Margaret and I attended, of course, but I noticed that Thomas introduced me to his new colleagues and Vanessa's family members as my father. Works in construction, never mentioning my engineering background or my property investments. During the reception, I found myself standing alone at the bar while Margaret chatted with some of the other guests. Charles Whitmore III approached me, swirling his martini. "So, William," he said, "Thomas tells me you're in construction, residential or commercial." "Both," I replied. "I started as a civil engineer, but I've always enjoyed building things with my own hands as well." He nodded politely, but I could see the dismissal in his eyes. To him, I was the blue-collar father of his daughter's husband, someone to be tolerated but not respected. "Well, that's certainly practical," he said. "I suppose someone has to do that kind of work." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. I smiled and changed the subject, but I understood that in their world I would always be seen as beneath them, regardless of my actual accomplishments or financial success. After the wedding, Thomas and Vanessa moved into a large suburban home with a mortgage that consumed nearly 60% of their combined income. They furnished it with designer furniture bought on credit, joined 2 country clubs, and began hosting dinner parties where they entertained other young professional couples. Margaret and I were invited to a few of these gatherings in the beginning, but it became clear that we didn't fit the image Thomas and Vanessa were trying to project. The other guests were lawyers, doctors, financial advisors, and marketing executives. The conversations revolved around stock options, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and private school options for children they hadn't had yet. During one such dinner party, I made the mistake of mentioning that I had recently renovated one of my rental properties myself, installing new plumbing and updating the electrical system. "Oh, how practical," said Vanessa's friend Janet, a real estate agent who specialized in luxury homes. "I could never do that kind of work myself. That's what contractors are for, right?" The table laughed, and I saw Thomas's face flush with embarrassment. After the other guests left, he pulled me aside. "Dad, maybe it's better if you don't mention the rental property stuff when we have people over," he said. "It's just, these people don't really understand that kind of thing." I looked at my son who was living beyond his means, stressed about money constantly, and apparently ashamed of the father who had taught him everything he knew about hard work and responsibility. "I understand, Thomas," I said quietly. "I wouldn't want to embarrass you." Margaret was furious during the drive home. "How dare he," she said, her hands clenched in her lap. "How dare he be ashamed of you when everything he has, everything he is, comes from your hard work." "He's young," I said, though my heart was heavy. "He'll understand eventually." I was wrong. As the years passed, Thomas's attitude toward me grew worse, not better. The distance between us became a chasm, and I began to realize that the son I had raised and loved had become someone I barely recognized. In 2010, Thomas and Vanessa had their first child, a daughter they named Emma. I was thrilled to become a grandfather, but my joy was tempered by the realization that I barely saw my granddaughter. Thomas and Vanessa lived 6 hours away, and they visited us maybe twice a year, usually for major holidays. When they did visit, they treated our home like a quaint museum. "Look, Emma," Vanessa would say, "this is how people used to live." She would point out features of our house, the original hardwood floors, the built-in bookshelves, the craftsman-style details, as if they were curious artifacts from a bygone era. 2 years later, they had a son, Michael. Again, I was excited to be a grandfather, but again, my relationship with my grandchildren was limited by distance and Thomas's apparent reluctance to spend time with us. By 2015, Margaret had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, and caring for her became my primary focus. I sold my engineering consulting business to a younger colleague so I could be home with her full-time. The rental properties continued to generate income, but I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations so I could focus on Margaret's needs. Thomas visited us once during Margaret's illness. Once. He stayed for 2 hours, spent most of that time on his phone dealing with work calls, and left saying he would try to visit more often. He never did. I called him regularly to update him on Margaret's condition, but the conversations were brief and awkward. He would ask how she was doing, I would tell him, and then he would find reasons to get off the phone quickly. "I'm sorry, Dad, but I have a conference call starting in 5 minutes. I wish I could talk longer, but Vanessa needs help with the kids. We should definitely plan a visit soon, but things are just crazy at work right now." Margaret passed away in 2018 at home with me holding her hand. I called Thomas to tell him, and he arrived for the funeral with Vanessa and their 2 children, kids I barely knew because they lived 6 hours away and visited maybe once a year. At Margaret's funeral, several of my tenants approached me to offer their condolences. These were good people who had been renting from me for years, and I had developed genuine friendships with many of them. Mrs. Chen, who rented the small house on Elm Street, had brought me homemade soup every week during Margaret's illness. Mr. Rodriguez, who rented the apartment above the hardware store, had helped me install handicap rails in our bathroom when Margaret started having mobility issues. "Your father seems to know a lot of interesting people," Vanessa commented to Thomas after the service. I heard the judgment in her voice, the implication that my relationships with my tenants were somehow beneath their social status. Thomas nodded and changed the subject. After the funeral, Thomas pulled me aside. Dad, have you thought about what you're going to do now? I mean, this house is pretty big for just one person. Maybe it's time to consider downsizing. I looked around the home I had built with my own hands, where I had raised my son, where I had cared for my wife through her final years. I'm comfortable here, Thomas. This is my home, but it's so much work to maintain, he pressed. And frankly, Dad, you're not getting any younger. Maybe it would be better to sell and move into one of those nice senior communities. The senior communities he was referring to were expensive assisted living facilities where people paid $4,000 a month to have someone else cook their meals and organize their activities. I was 63 years old, in excellent health, and perfectly capable of caring for myself and my property. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I'm fine where I am. He frowned, but didn't push the issue further. At least not then. Over the next 2 years, Thomas's visits became less frequent and more utilitarian. He would stop by every few months, usually when he needed something, a power tool to borrow, help moving furniture, or advice about a home repair project. During these visits, I began to notice him looking around the house differently, almost as if he were appraising it. Dad, you really should think about updating this place, he said during one visit in early 2020. The kitchen is so dated and these floors are showing their age. The floors are solid oak that I installed myself, I replied. They've been refinished twice and they'll last another 50 years. But the style is so old-fashioned, Vanessa added. Open floor plans are much more desirable now. You could knock out some of these walls, modernize the whole space. I looked at the walls she wanted me to remove, walls I had carefully planned and built to support the structure of the house, walls that separated the formal dining room from the kitchen, creating distinct spaces for different activities. Walls that had been built with purpose and function in mind, not just aesthetic trends. I like the house the way it is, I said. They exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice. The real problems started in 2021. Thomas began calling more frequently, but not to check on my well-being. Instead, he wanted to discuss my finances and my future planning. Dad, I've been thinking, he said during one phone call. You're 66 now, and it might be time to start thinking about transferring some of your assets, for tax purposes. I had been managing my own finances successfully for 43 years. I had built a portfolio worth several $1 million, owned properties that generated substantial monthly income, and had never missed a payment or made a poor investment decision. But suddenly my son was concerned about my financial management. I'm comfortable with my current arrangements, Thomas, I said. But Dad, there are strategies we could implement. Tax shelters, trust funds, estate planning techniques. My friend David is a financial advisor, and he says there are ways to protect your assets that you probably don't know about. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was talking to me like I was an elderly man who didn't understand money, rather than the person who had taught him everything he knew about financial responsibility. I have an accountant and an estate attorney, I replied. Everything is properly planned. Are you sure they're giving you the best advice? Thomas pressed. Some of these older professionals don't keep up with the latest strategies. My accountant was 45 years old and my estate attorney was 52. They were hardly older professionals stuck in outdated methods, but I didn't argue the point. The phone calls continued. Thomas would call every week or two with new suggestions about how I should manage my money, where I should live, what I should do with my time. Each conversation carried the underlying assumption that I was no longer capable of making good decisions for myself. Then came the visit that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon in October 2021. I was in my workshop, refinishing an antique rocking chair that Margaret's grandmother had left to us. I enjoyed woodworking. It kept my hands busy and my mind focused, and there was something satisfying about taking something old and worn and making it beautiful again. Thomas arrived without calling first, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that he brought David, his financial advisor friend, with him. Dad, I hope you don't mind, but I brought David along. I thought it might be good for him to see the house, get a sense of your situation. David was a man in his early 30s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked around my workshop with barely concealed disdain, as if the very idea of working with one's hands was foreign and distasteful to him. Mr. Morrison, David said, extending a hand that had clearly never held a tool more complex than a pen. Thomas has told me so much about you. I understand you have some properties you're managing. Few, I replied. Well, property management can be quite complex, David continued. There are liability issues, maintenance concerns, tax implications. Have you considered liquidating some of these assets and moving into a more diversified portfolio, something more appropriate for someone in your life stage? I set down my sandpaper and looked at this young man who was suggesting I abandon investment strategies that had been successful for decades in favor of whatever commission-generating products he was selling. My properties have served me well, I said calmly. But Dad, Thomas interjected, David makes a good point. You're spending so much time dealing with Tenant issues and maintenance problems. Wouldn't it be easier to simplify? What Thomas didn't understand or chose not to acknowledge was that I enjoyed managing my properties. I liked my tenants, I took pride in maintaining quality housing for them, and the rental income provided me with both financial security and a sense of purpose. The maintenance problems he was referring to were minor issues that I could usually resolve myself in an hour or two. I'm not looking to make changes right now, I said. David pulled out his briefcase and removed a folder full of glossy brochures. I've put together some preliminary recommendations based on what Thomas has told me about your situation. Conservative investments, steady income, professional management. You could sell the properties, invest the proceeds, and eliminate all the hassle. I accepted the folder politely but didn't open it. Thank you. I'll review this when I have time. Thomas and David spent the next 2 hours walking through my house, with David making notes and asking questions about square footage, lot size, and estimated property value. I followed behind them, growing increasingly uncomfortable with what felt like an appraisal rather than a social visit. This is a beautiful home, David said as we concluded the tour. Classic construction, great bones. In this market, it would probably sell very quickly. I'm not selling, I said firmly. Of course not, Thomas said quickly. We're just exploring options, planning ahead. After they left, I sat in my living room and thought about what had just happened. My son had brought a stranger into my home to evaluate my assets and suggest that I liquidate everything I had worked to build. He had done this without my permission, without my request, and without any consideration for my feelings or preferences. That night, I called my estate attorney, Benjamin Walsh. Ben, I said, I need to review my will and estate planning documents. I want to make sure everything is exactly as I intend it to be. Of course, William, is there something specific you're concerned about? I told him about Thomas's recent behavior, the phone calls, the visit with the financial advisor. Ben listened without interrupting. William, he said when I finished, I've seen this pattern before. Adult children sometimes begin to view their aging parents as incapable of managing their own affairs, especially when significant assets are involved. The best protection is to make sure your wishes are clearly documented and that you have safeguards in place. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. Meanwhile, Thomas's calls became more frequent and more insistent. He wanted to know about my bank accounts, my rental income, my investment portfolio. He suggested that it would be easier if he helped me manage my finances, maybe by adding his name to some of my accounts, just in case something happens. Dad, you're not going to live forever, he said during one particularly blunt conversation. We need to make sure everything is organized so that when the time comes there aren't any complications. I was 66 years old and in excellent health. I worked out at the local gym 3 times a week, maintained my own property, and had just passed my annual physical with flying colors. But Thomas was talking to me like I was on my deathbed. I'm not planning to go anywhere anytime soon, I said. Of course not, but you have to be realistic. What if you have a heart attack? What if you fall and break a hip? What if you develop dementia like Mom did? The mention of Margaret's dementia stung particularly hard. Thomas had barely been present during her illness, but now he was using her condition as a weapon to make me question my own mental capacity. I'm thinking clearly, Thomas. I'm capable of managing my own affairs. But Dad, things are different now. Financial management is more complex than it used to be. There are regulations and tax laws that change constantly. Maybe it would be better to let professionals handle it. The professionals he was referring to were him and his friend David, neither of whom had ever owned rental property, built a business from scratch, or demonstrated the kind of long-term financial success that I had achieved. In November 2021, Thomas announced that he and Vanessa and the kids were coming for Thanksgiving. I was pleased. It had been almost a year since I had seen my grandchildren, and I hoped that a family holiday might help repair the growing tension between us. I spent days preparing. I cleaned the house thoroughly, planned an elaborate menu, and even bought new furniture for the guest rooms so the kids would be comfortable. I was determined to make it a perfect Thanksgiving, the kind of family gathering that Margaret had always loved to host. Thomas, Vanessa, and their 2 children, Emma, who was 12, and Michael, who was 10, arrived on Wednesday evening. The kids had grown so much since I'd seen them last, and I was excited to spend time with them, to show them the workshop, to tell them stories about their grandmother. But something was wrong from the moment they walked in the door. Thomas and Vanessa exchanged looks as they surveyed the house, the same appraising looks I had noticed before. They commented on things that needed updating: the wallpaper in the guest bathroom, the carpet on the stairs, the kitchen appliances that were so retro. Grandpa, Emma said as I showed them to their rooms, why is your house so old-fashioned? Before I could answer, Vanessa interjected. Some people prefer traditional styles, sweetheart. It's just different from what you're used to. The way she said traditional made it sound like a polite word for outdated. Thanksgiving Day started well enough. I got up early to put the turkey in the oven, a 22-pound bird that I had ordered from the same local farm where I had been buying turkeys for 20 years. I prepared all of Margaret's traditional side dishes, sage stuffing, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce made from fresh cranberries, sweet potato casserole with marshmallows. The kids helped me set the table using Margaret's good china, the set we had received as a wedding gift and used only for special occasions. I told them stories about their grandmother as we arranged the plates and folded the napkins, and for a few hours it felt like the family gathering I had hoped for, but as the day progressed, the atmosphere grew tense. Thomas and Vanessa spent most of their time in whispered conversations, pointing at various aspects of the house and speaking too quietly for me to overhear. When I asked if they needed anything, they would stop talking and smile politely, but I could feel the undercurrent of judgment. During dinner, Thomas brought up the subject I had been dreading. Dad, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we're concerned about you living in this big house all by yourself. I looked around the dining room table at my son, my daughter-in-law, and my grandchildren and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather outside. I'm managing fine, I said, but it's so much work, Vanessa added. All this space to maintain, the yard work, the repairs. Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere smaller? Somewhere with less responsibility. Emma and Michael were listening to this conversation with the wide-eyed attention that children give to adult discussions they don't quite understand. I didn't want them to witness a family argument, so I kept my voice calm and measured. I appreciate your concern, but I enjoy taking care of this place. It's my home. But Dad, Thomas pressed, what happens when you can't take care of it anymore? What happens when you're too old to climb ladders and fix things yourself? I'll deal with that when the time comes. Thomas set down his fork and looked at me directly. The time is coming sooner than you think. You're almost 67 years old. How much longer do you really think you can keep this up? There it was, the assumption that had been underlying all of our recent conversations. Thomas had decided that I was too old to live independently, too old to manage my own affairs, too old to make my own decisions. At 66, an age when many people are still working full-time careers, he had written me off as elderly and incapable. I'm in excellent health, I said. I have no intention of giving up my home. Vanessa leaned forward. William, we're not trying to pressure you, we're just thinking about what's best for everyone. This house is worth quite a bit of money, and if something happened to you it would be complicated. The word complicated hung in the air like a threat. They weren't concerned about my well-being, they were concerned about their inheritance. After dinner, while I was cleaning up in the kitchen, I overheard Thomas and Vanessa talking in the living room. They thought I couldn't hear them, but sound carries in that old house. He's being completely unreasonable, Vanessa was saying. This place is way too much for him to handle. I know, Thomas replied, but he's stubborn. He always has been. Maybe we need to be more direct. Have you looked into what's involved in getting power of attorney? My hand stopped moving as I processed what I had just heard. They were discussing taking legal control of my life and my assets. I don't think we're there yet, Thomas said, but if he keeps refusing to listen to reason. I finished cleaning the dishes in silence, my mind racing. My own son was considering having me declared incompetent so he could take control of my property and my finances. The son I had raised, educated, and loved unconditionally was plotting to strip me of my independence. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Thomas approached me in my study where I was reading. Dad, I want to apologize if we came on too strong earlier. We're just worried about you. I looked up from my book. I understand your concern, Thomas, but I need you to understand something too. I'm not ready to give up my independence. I'm not ready to sell my home, and I'm not ready to turn my financial decisions over to someone else. He sat down in the chair across from my desk. But what if something happens to you? What if you have an accident or get sick? Wouldn't it be better to have things organized beforehand? I have things organized, I said. I have a will, I have medical directives, I have all the legal documents I need. But those are for actual emergencies, not for the theoretical possibility that I might someday need help. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that revealed the true nature of his concern. Dad, do you realize how much this house is worth? And the rental properties? We're talking about millions of dollars. That's a lot of responsibility for one person to handle. There it was, not concern for my health or safety, but concern about the millions of dollars that would eventually become his inheritance. He wasn't worried about me, he was worried about the assets. I've been handling that responsibility successfully for 40 years, I said. But what if you make a mistake? What if someone takes advantage of you? What if you get confused and make a bad decision? I set down my book and looked at my son directly. Thomas, I built this wealth from nothing. I started with a $500 down payment on a piece of land that nobody wanted, and I turned it into a portfolio worth millions. I've never made a bad real estate investment, never missed a mortgage payment, never failed to properly maintain a property. What makes you think I'm suddenly going to become incapable of making good decisions? He didn't have an answer for that because there was no rational answer. His concern wasn't based on any evidence of declining capability. It was based on his desire to control assets that he viewed as rightfully his. The rest of their visit was tense but civil. Thomas and Vanessa continued to make subtle comments about the house, about my lifestyle, about my future needs. But I had heard enough to understand their true intentions. After they left on Sunday, I called Ben Walsh again. Ben, I need to make some changes to my estate planning documents, I said. What kind of changes? I want to add some protections. Safeguards against anyone trying to have me declared incompetent or take control of my assets while I'm still alive. Ben was quiet for a moment. William, has someone threatened you? Not directly, but I think someone is considering it. We met the following Tuesday in Ben's office downtown. I brought all my financial documents, property deeds, and estate planning papers. Ben reviewed everything carefully, making notes as he went. William, he said after nearly an hour of examination, your affairs are in excellent order. Your will is current, your medical directives are clear, and your financial management has been exemplary. There's absolutely no basis for anyone to question your competency. But what if they try anyway? I asked. Then we'll be ready for them. I'm going to draft some additional documents that explicitly state your mental competency and your wishes regarding your property and finances. We'll also establish a medical evaluation protocol. If anyone ever challenges your capacity, we'll have a clear process for proving your competence. Ben leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. William, I have to ask, are you sure about your son's intentions? Sometimes family members express concern in ways that come across as controlling, but their motives are genuinely caring. I told him about the conversation I had overheard, about the power of attorney discussion, about Thomas bringing David to evaluate my house without my permission. Ben's expression grew more serious as I spoke. I see, he said when I finished. In that case, I think we should also establish a financial monitoring system. Regular documentation of your decision-making capacity, periodic reviews of your investment performance, maybe even video recordings of our meetings to demonstrate your mental acuity. Is that really necessary? William, I've been practicing elder law for 25 years. I've seen families tear themselves apart over money. The best protection is preparation. Over the next few weeks, Ben and I worked together to create what he called a competency fortress, legal documents, medical evaluations, and financial records that would make it virtually impossible for anyone to successfully challenge my capacity to manage my own affairs. Meanwhile, Thomas's phone calls continued. Each conversation followed the same pattern: expressions of concern about my living situation, suggestions about simplifying my finances, and increasingly direct questions about my assets and my plans for them. Dad, I've been thinking about what we discussed at Thanksgiving, he said during one call in December. Have you given any more thought to David's suggestions? I had thrown David's brochures in the trash without reading them. I'm not interested in making any changes right now, Thomas. But Dad, some of these opportunities are time-sensitive. Tax advantages that won't be available next year. Investment options that could really benefit you. The pressure was subtle but constant. Thomas would call every few days with new reasons why I should liquidate my properties, consolidate my assets, or simplify my financial arrangements. Each conversation carried the underlying message that I was too old and too unsophisticated to manage my own money properly. In January 2022, Thomas surprised me with an unexpected visit. He arrived on a Saturday morning without calling first, which had become his pattern, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought Vanessa, both children, and David, the financial advisor. Dad, I hope you don't mind the crowd, Thomas said as they all trooped into my living room. We were in the area visiting friends, and David had some documents he wanted to review with you. This was a lie. Thomas lived 6 hours away, and there was no reason for them to be in the area unless they had come specifically to see me. The fact that he had brought his entire family and his financial advisor suggested this was a planned intervention, not a casual visit. David was carrying the same leather briefcase as before, and he seemed more aggressive this time, less polite. He set up his materials on my dining room table as if he owned the place. Mr. Morrison, he began, I've done some research on your properties, and I have to say, I'm concerned about some of the risks you're taking. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers, printouts from real estate websites, tax assessment records, and what appeared to be market analysis reports. For instance, this apartment building on Cedar Street, it's in a flood zone. Do you realize the liability exposure you have if there's ever a major storm? And this rental house on Maple Avenue, the roof is over 20 years old. If it fails and causes water damage to the tenant's belongings, you could face a substantial lawsuit. I looked at the documents he was spreading across my table. How did you get information about my properties? Public records, David replied smoothly. Property ownership is a matter of public information, and as your son's financial advisor, I felt it was important to understand the full scope of your holdings so I could provide appropriate advice. The presumption was breathtaking. David wasn't my financial advisor, he was Thomas's friend, who was trying to convince me to liquidate my assets so he could earn commissions on whatever investment products he was selling. But he was acting as if I had already hired him. Mr. Morrison, David continued, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of your portfolio, and I have to tell you I see some serious concerns. He pulled out more documents, charts and graphs and projections that painted my successful real estate investments as ticking time bombs of liability and risk. Property management becomes exponentially more difficult as we age, he said. Coordination issues, memory problems, decreased physical mobility, these are natural parts of aging that can make real estate ownership dangerous for seniors. I was 67 years old, not 87. I was in excellent health with no memory problems and no mobility issues. But David was talking to me as if I were already showing signs of senility. Thomas jumped in to support David's presentation. Dad, we're not trying to pressure you, but these are real concerns. What if you forget to renew an insurance policy? What if you don't notice a maintenance problem until it becomes expensive? What if a tenant takes advantage of you? Vanessa added her voice to the chorus. William, we love you and we just want to make sure you're protected. There are so many people out there who prey on older adults, especially those with significant assets. The irony was thick. They were warning me about people who might take advantage of me while simultaneously trying to take advantage of me themselves. Emma and Michael were sitting on my couch, playing video games and largely ignoring the adult conversation. But I noticed that Emma occasionally looked up with a confused expression, as if she couldn't understand why everyone was talking about her grandfather like he was incompetent. I appreciate your concern, I said finally, but I'm not interested in making any changes to my financial arrangements. David's friendly demeanor slipped slightly. Mr. Morrison, with respect, I don't think you fully understand the risks you're facing. The real estate market is volatile, interest rates are changing, and tax laws are becoming more complex every year. These aren't the kind of decisions that someone without professional training should be making alone. The condescension was no longer subtle. David was essentially telling me that I was too stupid to manage my own money, despite the fact that I had been doing so successfully for decades. I have professional advisors, I replied. My accountant handles my tax planning, my attorney handles my legal issues, and my property manager helps with day-to-day operations. But do you really trust them? Thomas asked. I mean, Dad, some of these people have been around forever. Are you sure they're giving you current advice? Are you sure they're not just taking advantage of your loyalty? The word loyalty was delivered with the same tone Vanessa had used for traditional, a polite way of saying something less charitable. David pulled out his final weapon, a thick folder labeled Estate Preservation Plan. Mr. Morrison, I've taken the liberty of drafting a comprehensive plan for protecting and growing your assets. Conservative investments, professional management, tax optimization strategies. If you implement these recommendations, you could reduce your stress, eliminate your liability exposure, and actually increase your net worth. He opened the folder to reveal page after page of charts, projections, and product descriptions. Mutual funds, annuities, managed portfolios, trust structures, a complete financial makeover that would strip me of all control over my own money while generating substantial commissions for David. The best part, David continued, is that Thomas has agreed to serve as the trustee for these arrangements. That way, if anything ever happens to you, there won't be any delays or complications. Everything will be managed smoothly and professionally. There it was, the real plan. They wanted me to transfer control of my assets to Thomas while I was still alive, ostensibly for my own protection, but actually for their convenience. If I agreed to their scheme, I would become financially dependent on my son's goodwill for the rest of my life. I looked at Thomas, searching his face for any sign of the boy I had raised, the young man I had taught to work with his hands and take pride in honest labor. Instead, I saw a stranger who viewed me as an obstacle to his inheritance. I need some time to think about this, I said. Of course, David replied, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. But I do want to emphasize that some of these opportunities are time-sensitive. The longer you wait, the more you risk missing out on significant advantages. The pressure tactics were obvious and clumsy, but they revealed the desperation behind the polished presentation. David needed me to sign documents immediately, before I had time to consult with my own advisors or think clearly about what I was being asked to do. After they left, I sat in my quiet house and tried to process what had just happened. My son had brought a stranger into my home to convince me that I was too old and too incompetent to manage the wealth I had spent 40 years accumulating. He had allied himself with someone who viewed me as a commission opportunity, and together they were trying to manipulate me into surrendering my financial independence. That evening, I called Ben Walsh immediately. Ben, I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday night, but I need to talk to you about something urgent. What's happened, William? I described the day's events, the surprise visit, David's presentation, the pressure to sign papers immediately. Ben listened without interrupting, and I could hear him taking notes. William, he said when I finished, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse. It may not be criminal, but it's certainly unethical. And the fact that your son is involved makes it particularly concerning. What should I do? First, don't sign anything without having me review it first. Second, I want you to document everything: dates, times, conversations, witnesses. Third, I think we need to accelerate our competency protection plan. What does that mean? It means we're going to create an unshakable legal record of your mental capacity and your wishes regarding your assets. If anyone tries to challenge your competency or your decisions, we'll be ready for them. The following Monday, Ben and I met with Dr. Patricia Hansen, a geriatrician who specialized in competency evaluations. Dr. Hansen put me through a comprehensive examination, cognitive tests, memory assessments, problem-solving exercises, and a thorough review of my medical history. Mr. Morrison, she said after completing her evaluation, you show no signs of cognitive impairment. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning skills are sharp, and your decision-making capacity is completely intact. Frankly, you're functioning at a higher level than many people half your age. Dr. Hansen prepared a detailed report documenting my mental competency, which Ben added to my growing file of protective documents. We also arranged for regular follow-up evaluations to create an ongoing record of my cognitive health. But even as we were building legal protections, Thomas was escalating his campaign to gain control of my assets. The phone calls became more frequent and more insistent. He began showing up at my house unannounced, sometimes bringing David, sometimes bringing Vanessa, always with new reasons why I needed to simplify my financial arrangements. In February, Thomas played what he thought was his trump card. Dad, he said during one of his surprise visits, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to move closer to us. We were sitting in my living room, the same room where I had held him as a baby, where Margaret and I had celebrated Christmas mornings, where we had hosted countless family gatherings. Thomas was suggesting that I abandon the home I had built with my own hands. I'm comfortable here, I said, but Dad, you're getting older and we worry about you living alone. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency? What if something happens and nobody finds you for days? These were the same scare tactics he had been using for months, designed to make me afraid of my own independence. I have neighbors, Thomas. I have friends. I have a medical alert system. I'm not isolated. But it would be so much better if you were closer to family. We found a beautiful senior community just 10 minutes from our house. It has assisted living options, but also independent apartments for people who don't need full-time care yet. The word yet hung in the air like a prediction of inevitable decline. Thomas pulled out a glossy brochure for Golden Years Manor, an expensive retirement facility that looked more like a hotel than a place where people lived. The marketing materials emphasized maintenance-free living, social activities, and peace of mind for families. Look at all the amenities, Vanessa said, pointing to pictures of a swimming pool, a library, and a craft room. You could make new friends, participate in activities, have all your meals prepared for you. Wouldn't that be nice after all these years of taking care of this big house? What they were describing sounded like a prison to me, a place where other people controlled your schedule, your meals, your social interactions. A place where you gave up your independence in exchange for the illusion of security. I'm not ready for that kind of living arrangement, I said. Thomas's expression hardened. Dad, you keep saying you're not ready for things, but ready or not, time keeps moving. You're 67 years old. How long do you think you can keep pretending you're still young? The accusation stung because it was so unfair. I wasn't pretending to be young, I was simply refusing to act old. There's a difference between acknowledging your age and surrendering to it. Thomas, I'm in excellent health, I'm mentally sharp, and I'm perfectly capable of living independently. I don't understand why you're so determined to convince me otherwise. Because I care about you, he snapped, his careful politeness finally cracking. Because I don't want to get a phone call someday telling me that my father fell down the stairs and nobody found him for 3 days. Because I don't want to have to deal with the mess if you make a bad financial decision or if someone takes advantage of you. There it was, the truth behind all the expressions of concern. Thomas wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about the inconvenience my independence might cause him. He wanted me safely contained in a managed facility where other people would be responsible for my care and where he wouldn't have to worry about unexpected phone calls or complicated decisions. I understand your concerns, I said quietly, but this is my life, Thomas. These are my decisions to make. Vanessa leaned forward with a patronizing smile. William, we know you think you can handle everything on your own, but sometimes we all need to accept help. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. The manipulation was subtle but clear. She was trying to reframe my desire for independence as stubborn pride and their desire to control me as mature wisdom. After they left, I walked through my house, the house I had designed, built, and maintained for 43 years. Every room held memories. Every detail reflected choices that Margaret and I had made together. The wide plank oak floors I had installed by hand. The built-in bookshelves where we had displayed our favorite novels and photo albums. The kitchen where Margaret had cooked thousands of meals for our family. This wasn't just a house, it was the physical manifestation of a lifetime of love, work, and dreams. And my son wanted me to abandon it so that he could convert it into cash and I could live in a sterile facility where someone else controlled every aspect of my daily life. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I called Ben Walsh and asked him to meet me first thing Monday morning. Ben, I said when we sat down in his office, I want to restructure my will. What kind of restructuring are you thinking about? I want to remove Thomas as my primary beneficiary. Ben set down his pen and looked at me carefully. William, that's a significant decision. Are you sure you've thought this through completely? I've thought about nothing else for months. My son views me as an incompetent old man who's standing between him and his inheritance. He's brought strangers into my home to evaluate my assets. He's pressured me to give up my independence. He's tried to convince me that I'm too old and too confused to manage my own affairs. And when I refuse to comply with his wishes, he threatens to have me declared incompetent. I pulled out a notebook where I had been documenting Thomas's behavior, dates, times, witnesses, specific conversations. Ben, look at this pattern. Every interaction I've had with my son for the past 2 years has been focused on getting control of my money and my property. He doesn't call to ask about my health or my happiness. He doesn't visit to spend time with me. He comes here with financial advisors and real estate appraisers and retirement facility brochures. Ben reviewed my notes, his expression growing more serious with each page. This is quite comprehensive documentation, he said. It certainly supports your concerns about his motivations. I worked for 40 years to build wealth that would provide security for my family, but I never intended for that wealth to be used as a weapon against me. If Thomas can't respect me while I'm alive, why should he benefit from my death? William, changing your will is irreversible. Decision, are you sure there's no possibility of reconciling with Thomas? I thought about that question for a long moment. Ben, I would love nothing more than to have a relationship with my son based on love and respect, but Thomas has made it clear that he sees me as an obstacle to his inheritance, not as his father. Every conversation we have is about money. Every visit is about getting me to sign documents or move into a facility or liquidate my assets. When was the last time he asked me about my day, or told me about his children's activities, or simply spent time with me because he enjoyed my company? The answer was that I couldn't remember the last time Thomas had treated me like a person rather than like a problem to be solved. What are you thinking in terms of alternative arrangements? Ben asked. I want to establish a charitable foundation in Margaret's memory. The foundation will provide scholarships for students from working-class families who want to study engineering or education, the fields that Margaret and I devoted our careers to. I also want to set aside funds to maintain our house as a historic property and to continue providing quality rental housing at affordable prices for the families who depend on my properties. Ben was taking notes as I spoke. And what about Thomas? You don't want to provide anything for him. I'll leave him enough to pay off his mortgage and fund his children's college education. That's more than most people inherit, and it's enough to give him a financial boost without making him wealthy enough to stop working or contributing to society. What about your grandchildren? Emma and Michael will inherit the remainder of the estate when they turn 35, assuming they've demonstrated the kind of character and work ethic that would make their grandmother proud. Until then, the money will be managed by the foundation. Ben and I spent the next 3 hours working out the details of my new estate plan. The charitable foundation would receive 70% of my assets. Thomas would receive enough to significantly improve his family's financial situation without making him wealthy, and my grandchildren would eventually inherit substantial trust funds designed to support their education and careers rather than simply providing them with unearned wealth. William, Ben said as we concluded our meeting, this is a brilliant plan. It protects your assets, ensures they'll be used for charitable purposes, provides for your family's legitimate needs, and removes any incentive for Thomas to try to gain control of your finances while you're alive. When will the new documents be ready? Give me 2 weeks to draft everything properly. Then we'll need to sign everything with appropriate witnesses and notarization. But Thomas wasn't going to wait 2 weeks to make his next move. The following Saturday, he arrived at my house with 3 other people: Vanessa, David the financial advisor, and a woman I had never met before. Dad, this is Linda Patterson, Thomas said without preamble. She's a geriatric care specialist, and we asked her to come take a look at your living situation. Linda Patterson was a thin, officious woman in her 50s carrying a clipboard and a briefcase. She looked around my living room with the practiced eye of someone conducting an evaluation. Mr. Morrison, she said, extending a hand, I hope you don't mind, but Thomas expressed some concerns about your safety and your ability to maintain this large property on your own. I had not agreed to any evaluation. I had not requested any consultation, but somehow my son had brought a stranger into my home to assess my competency without my permission. I mind very much, I said firmly. I didn't request this evaluation and I don't consent to it. Thomas stepped forward. Dad, please don't be difficult. Linda is just here to help. She specializes in helping seniors transition to more appropriate living situations. The word transition was a euphemism for forced relocation. Linda opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of forms. Mr. Morrison, I understand your reluctance, but your family is concerned about you. This is a completely standard assessment. I just need to ask a few questions about your daily routine, your ability to manage household tasks, your social support network. I don't consent to this assessment, I repeated. But Linda was already making notes on her clipboard, documenting my resistance to evaluation, as if it were a sign of mental impairment rather than a rational response to an unwelcome intrusion. David pulled out his laptop and began showing me financial projections on the screen. Mr. Morrison, I've updated my analysis of your holdings, and I have to tell you, some of these properties are becoming serious liability risks. This apartment building, for instance, I've researched the tenant history, and there have been 3 maintenance complaints in the past year. That's a pattern that suggests declining oversight. 3 maintenance complaints out of 12 apartments over an entire year was actually an excellent track record, but David was presenting it as evidence of my declining capabilities. Vanessa chimed in with her own observations. William, we noticed that some of your windows need recaulking, and there's a loose board on your front porch. These might seem like small things, but they're indicators that the maintenance demands of this property are becoming too much for you to handle. Every house needs periodic maintenance. A few loose caulk joints and one board that needed a screw didn't indicate declining capability. They indicated normal wear and tear that any homeowner would address during routine upkeep. But Linda was writing everything down, creating an official record of maintenance deficiencies that could be used to support arguments about my inability to care for my property. Thomas pulled out the Golden Years Manor brochure again. Dad, we've already spoken with the admissions director, and they have a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment available. It's on the first floor, so no stairs to worry about, and it has an emergency response system built right into the bathroom. We could have you moved in within 2 weeks, Vanessa added. And David has all the paperwork ready for transitioning your assets into more appropriate investments for someone in your life stage. I looked at the 4 people in my living room, my son, his wife, his financial advisor, and a geriatric care specialist I had never met, and realized that this was an ambush. They had planned this intervention carefully, bringing professional authority figures to support their arguments and creating documentation that could be used against me if I refused to comply with their wishes. I want all of you to leave my house, I said calmly. Linda looked up from her clipboard. Mr. Morrison, I understand this is overwhelming, but running away from the conversation won't make the underlying issues disappear. She was characterizing my request that strangers leave my home as running away from the conversation, as if I were a child avoiding responsibility rather than an adult exercising my right to privacy. This is my home, I said, and I'm asking you to leave. Thomas's face flushed red. Dad, stop being so stubborn. We're trying to help you. No, Thomas, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. David closed his laptop and stood up. Mr. Morrison, I think you're making a serious mistake. The longer you wait to address these issues, the more limited your options become. It was a threat disguised as advice: comply now or face more serious consequences later, but I had heard enough. I walked to the front door and opened it. Please leave. Linda gathered her papers and moved toward the door, but stopped to hand me a business card. Mr. Morrison, when you're ready to discuss this rationally, please call me. I'm here to help. As they filed out of my house, I heard Thomas say to Vanessa in a voice he thought I couldn't hear, "We may have to consider other options." That phrase, other options, sent a chill down my spine. In the context of everything that had happened, it sounded like a threat to pursue legal action to have me declared incompetent. After they left, I called Ben Walsh immediately. Ben, they just tried to conduct an involuntary competency evaluation in my home. What? Who did? I described the ambush, the care specialist, the documentation, the pressure to sign papers immediately. William, what you're describing is potentially illegal. They can't conduct official competency evaluations without your consent or a court order. This Linda Patterson, I need to research her credentials and find out exactly what kind of evaluation she was attempting to perform. Ben, I'm scared. Thomas mentioned other options as they were leaving. I think they might try to petition the court to have me declared incompetent. If they do, we'll be ready for them. Your medical evaluations, your financial records, your documented competency, we have everything we need to defend against that kind of action. But William, I think it's time to accelerate your estate planning changes. How quickly can we get the new will completed? I'll have everything ready by Wednesday. Can you come in Thursday morning to sign the documents? I'll be there. But Thomas wasn't going to wait until Thursday. On Tuesday evening, I was in my workshop refinishing a chair when I heard cars pulling into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Thomas's BMW, followed by a white van with Elder Care Services printed on the side. My heart started racing. This looked like the kind of convoy that arrived to forcibly remove elderly people from their homes. I quickly went to my bedroom and retrieved the small recording device that Ben had given me, designed to document any attempts at coercion or manipulation. Then I went to the front door and waited. Thomas knocked, then opened the door without waiting for permission. He walked in followed by Vanessa, David, Linda Patterson, and two people. I didn't recognize a man in a uniform that looked like security guard attire, and a woman carrying a large bag that appeared to contain medical equipment. "Dad," Thomas said, his voice artificially cheerful, "we brought Dr. Reynolds to conduct a proper health assessment. We want to make sure you're okay, Doctor." Reynolds was a woman in her 40s wearing scrubs and carrying what appeared to be a portable medical kit. She looked around my living room with a practiced eye as if she were familiar with conducting evaluations in private homes. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "your family has expressed some concerns about your well-being. I'd like to conduct a brief examination to make sure you're healthy and safe." "I didn't request a medical examination," I said. "I have my own doctor and I see him regularly." "But when was your last comprehensive evaluation?" Linda Patterson interjected, consulting her clipboard. "When was the last time someone assessed your ability to live independently?" "I don't need to be assessed," I replied. "I live independently because I am independent." The uniformed man stepped forward. "Sir, we're here to help. If you could just cooperate with the examination, this will go much more smoothly." The implication was clear: cooperate voluntarily, or we'll make you cooperate involuntarily. Thomas pulled out a folder of documents. "Dad, we've prepared everything you need to transition to a safer living situation. Dr. Reynolds will complete her evaluation, Linda will finalize her assessment, and David has all the financial arrangements ready. We can have everything completed tonight." Tonight, I looked around at the faces surrounding me, family members and strangers united in their determination to strip me of my independence immediately. "The apartment at Golden Years Manor is available now," Vanessa said. "We can have you moved in by tomorrow evening. Won't that be nice? No more worrying about maintenance, no more dealing with tenant problems, no more managing all those properties by yourself." Dr. Reynolds opened her medical bag and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. "Mr. Morrison, if you could just sit down and let me check your vital signs, we can get started." I remained standing. "I do not consent to this examination." Linda Patterson made a note on her clipboard. "Patient refuses medical evaluation," she said aloud as she wrote. The word patient was significant. In her documentation, I had already been transformed from a competent adult exercising his right to refuse unwanted medical attention into a patient whose refusal was a symptom of impairment. David spread financial documents across my coffee table. "Mr. Morrison, I've expedited the processing of your asset transfers. If you'll just sign here, here, and here, we can have your properties listed for sale by the end of the week." I looked at the documents. He was pointing to legal forms that would transfer control of my assets to Thomas and authorize the immediate sale of properties I had spent decades acquiring and maintaining. "I'm not signing anything," I said. The uniformed man moved closer to me. "Sir, your family is concerned about your safety. Sometimes when people get older, they don't realize that they need help. That's not your fault, it's just part of aging." Thomas stepped forward with a pained expression on his face. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We love you and we just want what's best for you." Looking at my son in that moment, I felt a grief deeper than anything I had experienced since Margaret's death. The young man I had raised, taught, and loved had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could stand in my living room and try to steal my independence while claiming it was an act of love. But I also felt something else, a cold, calm anger that clarified my thinking and strengthened my resolve. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. "Dad," Thomas started, "all of you, get out of my house now." Dr. Reynolds packed up her medical equipment. "Mr. Morrison, I'll note in my report that you refused evaluation and appeared agitated and confused. I'll note in my report that you attempted to conduct an examination without consent and that I was completely lucid when I refused," I replied. Linda Patterson tucked her clipboard under her arm. "Mr. Morrison, we'll be submitting our preliminary findings to the appropriate authorities. Someone will be in touch with you soon about next steps." It was a clear threat: comply with our wishes, or we'll take legal action to force compliance. But as they filed out of my house, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. They had overplayed their hand. By bringing strangers into my home, attempting to conduct evaluations without my consent, and threatening legal action, they had created evidence of their own misconduct. More importantly, they had revealed the true nature of their intentions. This wasn't about my safety or my well-being, it was about gaining control of my assets as quickly as possible. After they left, I immediately called Ben Walsh, despite the late hour. "Ben, they just tried to conduct a forced competency evaluation in my home." "They what?" I described everything that had happened: the medical examination, the financial documents, the threats about appropriate authorities. "William, what they just did may be criminal. You can't conduct medical or psychological evaluations without consent or court authorization. And those threats about submitting reports to authorities, if they file false reports claiming you're incompetent, that could be considered fraud. What should I do? First, I want you to document everything that happened tonight. Write down every word you can remember, every person who was present, every document they tried to get you to sign. Second, I'm going to file for an emergency restraining order to prevent them from entering your property or harassing you further. Third, we're going to accelerate your estate planning changes. How quickly can we do this? I'll have everything ready first thing tomorrow morning. Can you meet me at my office at 8 a.m.? I'll be there. I spent that night writing down every detail of the evening's events, every conversation I could remember, every document they had tried to pressure me into signing. By morning, I had created a comprehensive record of what could only be described as an attempted financial kidnapping. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in Ben Walsh's office, signing the documents that would change everything. My new will remove Thomas as my primary beneficiary and establish the Margaret Morrison Memorial Foundation as the recipient of 70% of my assets. The foundation would provide scholarships for working-class students and maintain affordable rental housing in perpetuity. Thomas would receive enough money to pay off his mortgage and send his children to college, a generous inheritance by any standard, but not the millions he had been expecting. More importantly, the new will included explicit statements about my mental competency, my reasons for the changes, and my determination that these decisions reflected my own free will rather than any outside influence. "William," Ben said as we finished the paperwork, "you've just created one of the most legally bulletproof estate plans I've ever drafted. If anyone tries to challenge your competency or your decisions, we have documentation that will stop them cold." But the real moment of truth was still to come. That afternoon, Thomas called me. "Dad, I want to apologize for last night. Maybe we came on a little too strong." His voice had the artificial warmth of someone trying to repair a relationship for strategic reasons rather than genuine remorse. "We've been talking," he continued, "and we realize that we need to respect your wishes more. Maybe there's a way to work this out that makes everyone comfortable." I knew what was coming. Having failed to pressure me into immediate compliance, Thomas was going to try a softer approach, the same objectives, but with more subtle manipulation. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. He paused, and I could hear the wheels turning in his head. "Well, what if we found a compromise? You could transfer just a few of the properties to David's management just to see how it goes. And maybe we could set up a trust that gives you full control but has me as a co-signer just for emergencies." I could almost hear him thinking, he'll never know the difference. He'll sign the papers and I'll have all the control I need, but he was wrong. I wasn't the man he thought I was. The old man who might have been intimidated by a show of force had been replaced by one who had a plan and the legal documentation to back it up. "Thomas," I said, "I have to be honest with you. What you and your associates did last night was inexcusable. You brought strangers into my house, you tried to force me into a medical evaluation, and you threatened legal action against me. That's not love, that's an attempted financial kidnapping." The line was silent. Then in a strained voice he said, "Dad, that's a terrible thing to say. We were just worried about you. You're our family." "No, Thomas," I said, and the words were like a stone I had been carrying for years. "You stopped acting like my family a long time ago. Your mother and I worked our entire lives to build something of value, not just money, but a legacy. The money was for your security, not a weapon to use against me. It's clear to me now that you don't value the family, you only value what you can get from it. This is crazy." "Dad, what are you talking about? The will," I said, "is no longer what you think it is. I've restructured everything to better reflect my values. You and Vanessa will still be comfortable, but the rest of the estate will go to charity in your mother's name. You won't be able to turn my life's work into a payday, and I won't have to worry about you ever again." The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. I imagined his face, the disbelief, the rage, the sudden, shocking realization that his inheritance, his birthright, as he had always seen it, was gone. "You can't do that," he said, his voice now a low growl. "I'll fight you. I'll have you declared incompetent. I'll take you to court and get everything you have." "I'm sure you will," I said calmly. "And when you do, my lawyer, Ben Walsh, will be there with all the documents you tried to have me sign, the detailed records of your every action, and 2 independent medical evaluations from a geriatric specialist proving my mental competency. You've been building a case against yourself, Thomas, and now you have no one to blame but yourself." I took a deep breath, and for the first time in months I felt truly at peace. "This is it, son. This is goodbye." I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet of my home, a home filled with memories and a future that was finally my own. I had faced down my own son, not with anger but with truth and clarity, and in that moment I knew I had not lost a son, but instead I had finally found myself.